quickly, getting back to Charlie Kirk, like, I would watch those clips of him saying those things, man, and I would see how people would cheer and get charged by it. People get activated by hate. It's a very, very, very strong force. I had to be honest with you. That's when it got really, really difficult. When I went past my initial impressions and started like going through all of the clips of the things he said, the way he talked about people, the way he, described groups in ways that honestly, even as I was writing it, I was uncomfortable saying.
This is a conversation between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates about a column that Ezra Klein wrote that effectively defined Charlie Kirk as some paragon of political discussion. I wanted to go over a few things here because, I just found the entire thing to be incredible. One thing I have to say just off the bat, and I'm somebody who is involved in politics and talks to a lot of political people, but one of the things that so fascinates me about this moment is how much attention Charlie Kirk has gotten, just as a general rule. I've run into a lot of people who are involved in things, very intelligent, they're paying attention, they're voters, had never heard of Charlie Kirk, had never heard of him. And the very fact that we sit here analyzing every little thing and that he's such a big deal, and then there's this big thing in the stadium, and then, of course, the Republican right is trying to make him into the deity, is a big tell just in itself of how odd this entire moment is. Then immediately after everything that has happened, the guy was murdered in broad daylight in a very gruesome and violent way. There's fundraising off of it right away. I just find that to be strange, really strange. And I find, generally speaking, the entire analysis of him to be strange because Charlie Kirk is not new. He's not new to American politics. The stuff he was saying is not new. It's all throwback misogyny and throwback racism. There's nothing new about it. It's been done a million times before. What I do think is new because of our technological age is to see somebody get gruesomely murdered in broad daylight and have that loop again and again and again and again. Everybody sees it. That is a terrible thing. They actually mentioned that during the interview, as they should. And I think that the way that he died so publicly and so violently is what drives a lot of this conversation forward. But I'm just going to listen for a few clips here and go over a few things that are interesting. The thing that jumped out at me when I saw the first version of this, or the first viewing that I had of this, is just how smart Ta-Nehisi Coates is as compared to Ezra Klein.
And so the idea that this guy should be in any way celebrated for how he conducted politics, the fact that he just slurred across the board, all sorts of groups of people, and then ran an organization wherein, which appeared to me just a haven of hatred. I would not want that to be a model for my politics. And I know, as we talked between us that, you are not attempting to make a statement for the entirety of it. But I guess I feel like at a certain point, somebody's legacy, or somebody does something that is so large, that it's tough to think about their legacy and take that out of it.
That's absolutely the whole point of it. It was actually very familiar to what Pastor Howard John Wesley said at Alfred Street, which is this idea of, because he died in a certain way, that absolves and that erases how he lived, is a strange dynamic here, a unique one. And once again, I go back to what I said. I think that the technology, the way he died, broad daylight, we all see it, and it loops and it's played over and over again, and it's extremely violent. I think that is why that is. I think that's why a lot of people want to get away from the subject matter of what Kirk really stood for, what he really talked about, what he really pushed. To this day, if you go to the last few posts of his on X, it's about the woman who was murdered tragically on the train in North Carolina. And of course, Charlie Kirk is pushing the idea very heavily that the media is covering it in a certain way because of the colors of the victims and victim and the perpetrator. Everything about race, everything about trying to make it the most divisive argument possible. We had a guy, what was it, yesterday, actually the last 2 days, 2 white males. One kills, 2 people in North Carolina. The other kills 4 people at church, a Mormon church in Michigan. Do you see anybody on the left running out to say that, okay, wow, two white guys killed people. So now we're going to make these huge statements, these huge sweeping statements about race, the media, our country, and everything else. I'm sure that there are people out there making all sorts of points, but the difference is that Charlie Kirk's entire existence seemed to be to do this. I mean, he was spiking a level of divisiveness. It's quite interesting. But the right is really good at communication strategy. They're really good at defining something, keeping it a certain narrative, repeating it over and over again, and making the masses forget about what this is really about in a bigger, more general way.
And that's how I felt about it.
So I think I want to get at the right level of disagreement here. So I think one thing for me is that, I don't know, for me, the immediate hours after somebody is murdered in public, when you see that sort of grief and horror pouring out of the people who loved him, and many people loved him, my instinct then is to just sit with them in their grief, right? To say, I can, for this moment, find some way to grieve with you, to see your friend the way, or in some version of the way you saw him, right?
Yeah, it's a really sweet sentiment there by Ezra Klein. I'd love to see that on the right. It's interesting that only on the left do you have this feeling of, hey, let's do kumbaya and hold hands and think about how awful and terrible that was. You saw a lot of statements from politicians who are Democrats about Charlie Kirk saying how terrible it was. What do we get on the right? You get a lot of statements about we're at war. The left is at war with us.
They are at war with us. Whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war with us. What are we going to do about it?
Get Jesse Waters running out right after to say that. There's a huge difference in reaction on the right and left to the murder of Charlie Kirk. But this is an interesting take from Ezra Klein. In my view, this is what the left does, and while the right talks about war.
Right, that's not my view of, the person's whole legacy, but going to people when they're grieving like that and saying, listen, I want to tell you really what I thought of your friend. Just feels...
I mean, that is so interesting that he says that.
Then hopefully it's in a better place. Oftentimes it's not. That's the history, in fact. And then my progeny pick it up and they keep it going. I am descended from people who in their lifetime fought with all their might for the destruction of chattel slavery in this country. And they never saw it. They never saw it. In my personal belief system, they died in, defeat, in darkness.
Now, this is something really deep that ta-nehisi says that really kind of connects with a lot of people on the activism side. And I think that even though he might call himself a journalist, I think ta-nehisi is more of an activist than a journalist. There's always that stream going through Black journalism, whether it's the great Ida Wells or so many others. And this was a really stellar point that he was making that I think a lot of white journalists don't have to really contend with, because their personal history and ancestry is just different. It doesn't have a lot of times the same level of struggle. So this was a very interesting point. It was interesting to see the look on Ezra Klein's face. One would think he would know a little bit of something about this, because obviously if you're a member of the Jewish faith, you would know what it is to have your government come after you, your government hate you, your government take action against the group to which you belong as a minority group in a country. And I'm sure he does know something about that, at least in terms of legacy. But that point right there is a huge one by Coates.
And so I guess the privilege that I draw out of this, the honor that I draw out of this, is not that things will necessarily be better in my lifetime, but that I will make the contribution that I am supposed to make. The fact of the matter is, as horrifying as, that the killing of Charlie Kirk was, and as horrifying as the feeling is, this moment that we are in, an era of political violence, and I don't want to sound flip here, political violence is the norm for the Black experience in this country, too. You would be hard-pressed to have a conversation with a Black person in this country that is a descendant of slavery and not have them be able to reach maybe right here or to tell you themselves, look, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they lived in a small town in Mississippi in Tennessee, in Alabama. They got into some sort of dispute with a white man, and either they were lynched or we had to run.
That's the thing there, too, that when we talk about diverse newsrooms and diversity and history being erased by the Trump administration, that's a huge point right there. And that really is one of the biggest challenges, that there's so many people walking around who don't know the history of the people who don't look like them. And so they don't respect the history that they don't know about. We don't teach it in school. And so it's not fully understood why it is that people react the way they do to certain current events. These current events are not just current events. They're actually a repetition and a repeating of things that have already happened. And I think that there's a huge divide in our country with regard to historic education, because now we're getting into some sort of weird realm where if you want to talk about some of these historic events, then the folks that happen to look like the people who undertook those negative things are now too sensitive to hear what the full truth of the history of this country is. That's a hard thing to contend with, but to me, facts are what they are. And I do think that that's a major reason why a lot of folks on the right have decided to try to destroy facts, try to go after factual information and try to bury history. You have to do that to get people not caring about the positioning of those that are not in the same group as they are. You have to destroy the history. You have to destroy what happened. You have to destroy what that all is. Very hard to do, if not impossible, because every single person carries that history within them. But it was interesting to hear Coates say this with regard to Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk was ahistoric, very ahistoric. I mean, he seemed to know basic facts that he would refer to sometimes, but knowing and giving a damn in real time and linking those things to real-time events is quite another story. I don't want to make this video too long, but this was a very interesting discussion between Ezra Klein and ta-nehisi Coates. And what it made me think of more than anything else is that Ezra Klein has spent too much time in a newsroom and not enough time in a real job someplace, really having some experiences that aren't just dealing with some editor at the New York Times or the Washington Post. And that is something that I think is a problem with a lot of the journalists I encounter. They don't get it. They don't really understand, because so much of their life is spent watching other people do stuff rather than actually being the person, the man in the arena, as it were, to quote Teddy Roosevelt. It's a different, those are two completely different things. And I'll leave it at that. This is Lauren Burke, and I will be back very, very soon.
That's not a small amount of power. Like, that's not a small force. And so, just really quickly getting back to Charlie Kirk, like, I would watch those clips of him saying those things, man, and I would see how people would cheer and get charged by it. People get activated by hate. It's a very, very, very strong force.